distant world where semi-nomadic people lived, sometimes wandering across a vast area of plainsland, and sometimes settling by beautiful riverbanks. But no matter where they were, their families and possessions were close by. A people who valued the importance of each other and held kinship ties in the highest regard. A people who communicated across different cultures for trade, intercourse, and raiding and warring. A people who went into foreign territory to kidnap others from different cultures, sometimes to kill, but often to bring back the alien person and raise them as their own kin. A people who mastered the way of the horse and revolved their society and economy off the horse. Where would you guess a place like this existed? Ancient Mongolia? China, perhaps? You would be wrong if you guessed one of those. This mythical place I speak of is called Comancheria, and it has existed right here in the United States, covering parts of the present-day states of Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Colorado, and Kansas. The people who lived there were called Comanches, and their tribe was given the moniker the Lords of the South Plains, and rightfully so. Their lives revolved around their family, religion, and state, which was a much different statehood than one we think of today. Good morning, everyone. My name is Corey Callahan, and today I will be giving you a brief introduction to the history of the Comanche tribe. The Comanches migrated to the southern plains around the year 1700 and quickly established themselves as a prominent tribe in the region. They refer to themselves as the people, as many Native Americans did. Historians agree that the Comanche tribe was a breakoff of northern Shoshones, and even over time, the two tribes shared a common verbal language. The Comanches were a proud people who valued their kinship ties with one another. Although Comanches were one tribe, they had several different bands who resided together. As historians Ernest Wallace and E. Adamson Hobel say in their book, The Comanches, Lord of the South Plains, and I quote, "A Comanche, whatever his band, was a Comanche. By dress, by speech, by thoughts and actions, the Comanche held a common bond of identity and affinity that set them off from all other Indians." In a Comanche camp, one would see an interesting family dynamic. It was common for Comanches to live as extended families, placing a high value on the wisdom of their elders, but also relying on the young men for their band's safety. Comanche women were vital to the Comanche way of life, as they did all of the camp work needed to sustain the band. The women would do all of the cooking, hide cleaning, camp setup and teardown, which was difficult work, made even more difficult in the extreme weather they often faced on the Great Plains. The men, however, were primarily responsible for the hunting and warring. The main source of food for the Comanches was buffalo meat, which prior to the hide men destroying the population towards the end of the 1800s, was plentiful on the plains. Warring and camp safety were considered one of the most important and honorable jobs the men would ever do. Whether protecting their camp or conducting raids on enemy tribes, the warrior clans of Comanches were held in high regard. After completing a successful raid, either killing the enemy, stealing horses, or kidnapping people to raise as their own, the warrior society of the Comanches is what made them the Lords of the South Plains. It was on these plains that the Comanches ruled for hundreds of years, up until the westward expansion of the American settlers and pressure from the American army became too much for the tribe. And it was then the Comanches finally went into the reservation in the late 19th century as one of the last plains tribes to conform to America's policy. Religion, too, was a peculiar aspect to the Comanches. Peculiar in that they were considered the least religious of the plains people. They have been considered unbelievers by some. However, their religious beliefs were based more on an individual level, vice a generalized religion across the entire tribe during their lives. The main uniform faith across the different bands was that of the afterlife, where they would go beyond the sun. For the Comanches, the Great Spirit was everywhere, in animals, plants, and its people. One practice that the Comanches participated in was peyote rituals. Comanche bands were known to use peyote as early as the mid-19th century. However, it had a large resurgence in the early 20th century, after their move to the reservation. As Wallace and Hobel state, peyote worship developed essentially as a group experience. It always had been, and it still is. The old camp life was broken up. The Comanches were having to learn to live on isolated farmsteads. They yearned for the companionship of each other. In the peyote meetings, they were brought together in the warm intimacy of a sacred teepee. They sat shoulder to shoulder in common experience. There, they knew that they were not alone, and they could feel that not all was lost. Although the Comanches did not have what we would call a definitive country, any tribe living near the land, or any traveler who crossed the plains, most certainly knew or heard of Comancheria. Their state entailed an enormous area of land across the plains. However, they were usually found wherever the buffalo was. Regardless of their semi-nomadic lifestyle, their culture and pride in their state was very much alive. Wherever their camp was, games, festivities, gambling, and life itself was constantly flourishing. When George Catlin, the famous American painter, author, and scholar of Native Americans, visited a Comanche village in the 1830s, he observed their playing of sports by saying, and I quote, "Comanches, like the northern tribe, have many games, and in pleasant weather seem to be continually practicing more or less often, on the prairies, back of, and contiguous to their village. In their ball plays and some other games, they are far behind the Sioux and others of the northern tribes. But in racing horses and riding, they are equaled by no other Indians on the continent." When it came to the horse, the Comanches did it best. Their livelihood revolved around the horse, after they were introduced to the American plains by the Spanish at the end of the 16th century. From raids or hunting they conducted on the horse, no other person in America could effectively challenge a Comanche on his mount. The women, too, were experienced riders, all of them learning from a young age. The Comanches were the only Native American tribe that knew how to successfully breed horses. And when they needed to break a wild horse, their technique was a thing of legend. As author and historian S.C. Gwynn wrote about the Comanches and how they broke horses, he stated, and I quote, "A Comanche would lasso a wild horse, then tighten the noose, choking the horse and driving it to the ground. When it seemed as if the horse was nearly dead, the choking lariat was slapped. The horse finally rose, trembling in full lather. Its captain gently stroked its ears, its nose and forehead, then put its mouth over the horse's nostrils and blew air into its nose. The Indian would then throw a thong around the now gentle horse's lower jaw, mount up, and ride away." Not only did the Comanches use the horse for roaring and raiding, they used them for economic purposes too. The Comanches were known to possess more horses than any other tribe on the plains. A single Comanche warrior was known to own more horses than a chief of a different tribe. This fact highlights the influence the horse had on their livelihood. When Dr. Francis Haynes wrote an article for the American Heritage magazine regarding the introduction of horses to the Plains tribes, he took a quote from George Catlin, who penned it in 1834. During another visit with the Comanches, and I quote from George Catlin, "The Comanches were heavy and ungraceful, one of the most unattractive and slovenly-looking races of Indians that I have ever seen. The moment they mount their horses, they seem at once metamorphosed and surprise the spectator with the ease and elegance of their movements. A Comanche on his feet is out of his element, and comparatively almost as awkward as a monkey on the ground without a limb or branch to cling to. But the moment he lies his hand on a horse, his face even becomes handsome, and he gracefully flies away like a different being." The Comanches have been recorded as one of the fiercest tribes in Native American history. From their unparalleled skills on a horse to their ability to conduct successful raids on other tribes and white settlers, Comanches have a unique history. It separates them from other native tribes. In their family lives, they respected their elders and held their wisdom and maturity as invaluable assets to the tribe. The young men became part of hunting and warrior societies that provided the tribe's food and protected it from warring dames. And the women who completed the backbreaking work of camp life were vital to the survival of the Comanches. In religion, the Comanches were separate from most Native Americans in their individual beliefs and how they were more important than a generalized religion to the masses. However, they were still a great spiritual people and had a terrific respect for the Great Spirit. Their statehood, although not defined by definitive lines drawn on a map, consisted of their homeland, Comancheria, and it is where they lived their exceptional lives. From their economy of horses to their masterful ways of dominating the horse, to to the practicing of games and wrestling and gambling. Their statement was that of every basic Comanche, pride in who they were and the power they held on the plains. The Comanche Nation still exists today and is governed by the Comanche National Tribal Council. The tribe currently has 17,000 members. Although the Comanche tribe met the fate of nearly every Native American tribe in the modern-day United States, their history, supremacy, and peculiarities can be misunderstood as folklore. However, it is anything but, and they were, and still are, very real. Good morning, and thank you.